Good morning. I call the meeting to order. May I invite the first witness to come forward to the witness table? Good morning. For the record, could you please state your names and the position you occupy in your organization, starting with Professor Liu?
So I'm Dr. Liu Kai-Kun with the Nanyang Technological University, with the Wikimwi School of Communication and Information.
Thank you.
My name is Elton Chua. I'm Associate Chair for Research, Wikimwi School of Communication and Information, NTU.
Thank you. The evidence which you will be giving today before the committee will be taken on oath. You may, if you desire, you may also take an affirmation. Clerk, please issue the oath, please.
Okay. I, Elton Chua, swear that the evidence I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
I, Liu Kai-Kun, do solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence which I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Please be seated. Welcome to the public hearing on the Select Committee on Deliberate Online Falsehoods. The focus of today's evidence gathering session is for us to put questions to you. You have taken a solemn obligation to answer our questions truthfully. And I now call upon Dr. Janil to begin.
Thank you for coming to see us, Professor Liu and Professor Chua. And thank you for your submissions as well. We are fairly, I don't want to say late, but we have progressed quite a lot since the green paper was first tabled. And I'm sure you've been following some of the submissions and some of the debate and some of the commentary. So perhaps we might start with just your views on what has been presented to us as a committee, whether you broadly agree with some of the framings and some of the concerns. And then we can have a little bit of a discussion about what you see as opportunities to do something about this, and whether you agree with some of the positions that various other representations have put forth. So I would, if I say that the issue of deliberate falsehoods, deliberate online falsehoods, is something that's particularly serious for us here in Singapore as a function of the degree of connectivity that we have, the extent to which we rely on information from overseas, and the fault lines, potential or real, that exist in our society. You would largely both agree with that as a reasonable starting point. Yes?
Yes. You see?
Yes, I do agree broadly in principle of the severity or the potential severity of the issues, especially for Singapore, that is both historically and in contemporary times a very well-connected society to the outside world.
And if we look at some of the potential threats, threat areas that a variety of the submissions and the people who have come before us have identified, you'd agree that if we don't do something about this, or if we leave the opportunity there, our national security, our racial and religious harmony, potentially our economic stability, maybe even our sovereignty, if you define sovereignty in terms of cultural sovereignty, our mental sovereignty as it were. You'd agree with the people who've come before this committee to say that all of these things are potentially at risk?
I really agree with the general consensus that something has to be done. The good thing is that even though these are potential, these have not shown themselves to rear their ugly heads at the moment. So okay. I think we are in a very good time and in a good situation to preemptively make some decision as a country to tackle the falsehood.
So when you say it hasn't reared its ugly head, I think we can unpack that a little bit. Would both of you agree that around the world today, internationally, there's ongoing efforts to manipulate and spread deliberate online falsehoods? That this is an ongoing process, that people are creating online falsehoods, spreading online falsehoods and using online falsehoods for other purposes, whether they're economic, political, or criminal. Would you agree that that is currently happening out there in the world?
Yes, we do agree on that. In academic language, they call it like post-truth societies.
Yes.
And that because of what you call the democratization of the media, that everyone has the kind of skills to create their own platforms, to manipulate and to doctor information, and to put on different perspectives in a rapidly increasingly compressed time. So from the computers in the past to the mobile phones today, and maybe even artificial intelligence and bots in future.
So it's happening out there.
It's happening.
It's happening out there. Some of the, and when I say happening, it's happening online, and we have seen real-world consequences of some of these things happening out there in other jurisdictions. Is that right? So
That's correct.
Okay.
So while the rest of the countries are experiencing the fallout, I think we are fortunate in Singapore that the fallout has so far been not so rampant and is under control. But that doesn't mean that we will not be succumbing to such threats in the future.
So when you say it hasn't reared its ugly head here in Singapore, you are referring to the fact that the deliberate online falsehoods that are being spread have not had real-world consequences, or are you saying that there are no deliberate online falsehoods being spread in
No,
Singapore?
there definitely will be, there are deliberate online falsehoods, but the consequences so far has been rather muted.
Right.
So, for example, I did a research in 2015 about the death hoax of our late Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. So there was a circulation about his death, even though at the time he was still alive. But the falsehood was quickly quashed less than 3 or 4 hours later.
But the risk is there, and that's why you think you should do something.
That's right.
Some of the information that we've had presented to us suggests that work in this space, information ops, can be at a very low level, a low intensity level, low visibility level, to the point where it's insidious, it's under the radar, potentially even undetected or undetectable. Do you think it's possible that that may apply to us here in Singapore?
Okay. My sense is that the combat against deliberate online falsehood cannot be waged purely on the informational battlefield. It has to be waged outside in terms of the social compact between people and people, as well as people and government. So if we train our focus solely on the online space, then we are missing out on a lot of opportunities outside. Then we end up being forced in a corner where we firefight.
No, indeed. But Professor Chua, that's not quite what I asked. I agree, and largely many people who, on the committee as well as who have come to speak for us talked about a multifaceted approach. So while the terms of reference of the committee are looking only at the falsehood spread online, deliberate online falsehoods, I think there's a growing consensus that the solution or the intervention or the inoculation or the prevention may have to be online and offline.
That's right.
So, and we will come to that. In a minute.
Okay.
But my question is really: do you agree with some of the people who've presented positions to us, suggesting that if there is information warfare going on, if deliberate online falsehoods are being weaponized or being manipulated for whatever reason, as I'm not talking about the inadvertent errors and
Yeah,
so on,
that's right.
right? But is it possible that it may be so insidious that we don't even know it?
Possible. This is the unknown, right? So
Yes.
we currently have not detected anything, and we think that everything is okay. So
But do you think that's a reasonable concern, given what else is happening in the world? That we should, in addressing our approach towards deliberate online falsehoods, we should specifically be concerned about the possibility of insidious, low-level, what some of the representatives have talked about, a drip feed type of attack, that this is a reasonable concern?
Yep, definitely. For me, definitely.
Okay. So, in general, both of you would agree that the status quo is unacceptable?
No, not acceptable.
Not acceptable.
I do agree that the status quo is needs to be adjusted to changing conditions as well.
Okay, so it's unacceptable today, and a single solution or a single step may not be necessary. It perhaps needs to be an iterative approach over time.
That's right.
You would both agree with
Yeah.
that?
Yes, I do agree.
Yeah, that's right.
Who needs to play a part in the solutioning? And we can firstly identify the various players, and then we can think about some of the various propositions that have been put to us. Who do you think should have a sense of responsibility? Who do you think should take ownership of this problem? Who do you think needs to play a part in what we do in terms of solutions. And we can talk about that in terms of either sense-making, establishing sources and the facts, sources of truth and the facts, distribution of the truth, and a prevention of distribution of falsehoods, as well as, of course, punitive measures and reparations and so on and so forth. So there's sort of 4 different types of categories, but who do you think are the various players that need to play a role in this in the landscape?
I mean, my sense is that there should be government efforts to combat deliberate online falsehood, and likewise, we also want to foster ground-up initiatives. So I think it's a multi-modal, multi-pronged, multi-agency kind of approach to address something that is increasingly complex. And I'm not surprised that, say, 5 to 10 years later, whatever we have come up with might be inadequate. And then I think, again, we have to shift to deal with emerging and new threats.
So let's talk specifics. When you talk about a ground-up approach, are you talking about the corporate entities or civil society entities? Or?
I think for me, in my submission, I talk about the fact-checking communities that is already existing in social networks today. So these are by individuals who care about the country, who care about the spreading of truth rather than falsehood. And then it's already a natural affinity of members, and then they help to spread what is true.
So that's one part of the equation?
That's one part of the equation, that's right.
Okay. What do you think should be their relationship towards potential sources of truth or untruth? How do they empower themselves to be an arbiter of truth?
I think in the research on online space, we find that the community has some ability to self-correct. So if the truth are, if some messages are floating around, after a while, some people will question, and then there is this sense-making going on. And after a while, more and more people will jump in, questioning the validity of such claims, and soon there's enough traction, and then the rumor in particular get squashed.
So if that's happening today, then why do you say the status quo is unacceptable?
Because sometimes, for example, if it's a rumor, and after all, it may be verifiable, and some of the claims may not be immediately verifiable due to access to information. So that becomes more complex.
So then do state institutions then have a role to play in terms of establishing truth in a very rapid manner?
Yes, I believe so. I think government-led initiative will establish what exactly truth is.
And so specific to the issue in front of us, which is the significant deliberate online falsehoods addressed at significant issues that can destabilize a society, national security, sovereignty, political outcomes, economic outcomes. So what do you think should be the balance between civil society and state responsibility for establishing the truth in these matters?
I think as I've placed in my submission, I do have a substantial lot of faith in our local Singaporean online citizenry. By and large, they are very much sophisticated. They are able to point out falsehoods. They are able to call out on issues. Sometimes a little grumpy, especially in train breakdowns, but by and large, I think they are an educated and knowledgeable lot. But having said that, we are living in different times. We have seen in the American elections in Britain and after Cambridge Analytica expose that there are forces outside that do not respect the marketplace of ideas. There are forces outside that do have a more organized and concerted form of what I've placed in my submission of what they call online trolling offensive. They come in huge groups. They dominate the space, what they call information domination.
Sorry to interrupt you, Professor. We accept all this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've spent some time going through your submission, and we accept that this is the scale of the problem.
Yeah.
So my question then to you is, you suggested that the online citizenry have a significant role to play.
Yes.
Why do you think that is sufficient, or do you not think it is sufficient? And what can we do to bolster it if you don't think it's sufficient today?
I think on a normal day, as I've placed in my submission, low-level intensity of troll offensive by other countries, believing that like our news networks are spreading fake news in their countries, in their country. They dominate the space, so on a normal day, that is fine. But I think when it comes to emergencies, when it comes to events, elections, epidemic outbreaks, that I think the government should be acting like a lifeguard to raise the stakes, to get the networks maybe even to delete the posts, to place people under scrutiny, to have more effective monitoring of the interaction process.
So you're saying that there are times when the process goes wrong, or the process can be manipulated
Yes.
to adverse outcomes, at which point the government or the state needs to step in to break that process or to recalibrate.
Yes.
If I can summarize your position.
Yeah. So I would like to give a scenario. If, for example, we place ourselves in a situation of Little India riots breaking out in 2020 instead of 2013, someone can raise the stakes by spreading the rumors that they are not just rioting, but they are sexually assaulting local women. And sentiments get heightened. We see that in Sri Lanka currently as we're speaking. So I think it's time, maybe, the government should be acting like, maybe I give an analogy of like a lifeguard.
I understand. So, but one of the criticisms of that point of view is the interaction between the ongoing disinformation and what happens in a crisis. And one of the positions that have been put forward to the committee is that if you don't have a handle of ongoing disinformation campaigns, and trust is eroded in the ability for people to process information, and trust is eroded in the functioning of institutions to provide a source of truth, then when a crisis happens, you are unable to play the role that you have just explained. There's a position there. So slightly different from yours, where you are saying that you let things be, citizenry will play the role that they have, and therefore somehow that will moderate. When something goes wrong, you step in. This position suggests that you need to have a hand in the matter all the time, but what you do with the sense-making and what you do with the intervention perhaps needs to be calibrated depending on the impact.
Yes.
So there's some commonality,
Yeah.
but there's a slightly different view on that. What do you say to that?
But maybe I should slightly qualify myself. I believe that in the citizenry online need to put a kind of equilibrium. But having said that, I do think that the current, on a normal day like this, the current structures have been quite sufficient in dealing with online falsehoods. Very nuanced, in fact. I think Singapore takes a much more interventionist role. Right from the start, for example, even before the fiasco from Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, there has been very clear, I think since the 60s.
Yeah. So, Professor Lee, I'm just trying to keep us to the...
Sure.
So,
but what I'm implying is that the current culture, the current legal framework can be quite sufficient.
no, I understand. But that's not the question that I'm asking you. I think we get back to the issue where we've got a lot of views already. We understand the background. And there's quite a lot of differences of views on what that background means and where we should go. So we don't need to necessarily revise the background.
Okay, sure.
But what is your view on this particular issue of you need ongoing efforts to build trust so that when a crisis happens, you can intervene?
Yes.
Versus, well, you just step back and just wait until a crisis happens and then you intervene. So I'm just trying to get your sense of that.
I do agree with the former.
The former.
Yeah, which means there needs to be an ongoing effort to build trust.
Okay.
I'm not saying that we should just sit back and let things happen per se. Yeah.
So now we're coming back to who should play a part in this ecosystem. We've heard from both of you that the citizenry need to play a part.
Yes.
You imagine that the media companies need to play a part?
Yes, I do think that the media company needs to play a part.
What kind of role do you think the media companies need to play in this?
The curatorial aspects of the news, that they have to be very careful not to give the opportunities for other players to escalate the situation. Because this information doesn't come from information, it comes from anxieties. It comes from negative sentiments.
So from where we are today, if the status quo is unacceptable, what change do you imagine needs to happen with respect to media companies that will help us address this problem that you're both so concerned about?
I would say that media companies probably would have to be really upfront about the kind of funding sources and the curatorial aspects of the news.
So you're worried that
Yeah.
some of their financial structures will alter the editorial and curatorial decisions
Yes,
around deliberate online falsehoods?
yes, that's true. And I do feel that there's a lot of pressure, especially in the mainstream media. You're competing with different groups.
So, sorry,
Yeah.
you're worried about the mainstream media as a source of truth or as a source of deliberate online
No,
falsehoods?
I'm just saying that just an example that there's huge intense competition for eyeballs.
Yes, we've had some significant discussion about that.
Yeah, and therefore there's pressure to release news and information quickly.
Okay.
They are under significant. Everyone is under significant pressure there.
So your
Yeah.
feeling is that the media companies need to ensure that they adhere to a standard of professionalism and integrity.
Yep, that's right.
But today, you would argue that the mainstream media does that already?
Because of the scale of the operation, they are required to adhere to the standards.
So the gap is then perhaps, are you saying the gap is in the mainstream media or in the sort of the smaller players or the newer players, or what you call the alternative media, or even don't want to be called as media?
Individuals even.
Individuals
I mean,
even.
yeah, anyone can be his own media platform. So sometimes the alternative or even the mainstream media picks up this news from people or sentiments from the ground.
I see. Professor Chua, you have a view on this?
Yeah, I find that there should be a dialogue because all of these players are part of the ecosystem, and then the relationship among all these players shouldn't be adversarial. So it should be a constant dialogue. So maybe once a quarter, once half a year or so on, the government agencies and all these players can come together for some kind of dialogue to understand each other. And then sometimes that's how trust is built over a long period of time.
But they're competitors for eyeballs and advertising revenue, are they not?
Yeah, so on the one hand, they compete on the financial grounds, but on the other hand, they are all guardians of truth. And then we all have a stake in the well-being of Singapore.
But all of them don't necessarily have the same degree of financial transparency over their incentives and...
Yes, that's right. But at least the level of trust and the role to play to uphold truth, for example, in the country should be somehow normalized among all these players.
I'm trying to understand. So you have a variety of players,
Right.
some large, some small.
Yeah, that's right.
You're suggesting that we should perhaps treat them equally? But
No, not treat them equally, but rather bring them together on board so that everybody's on the same page. with
no, but
regard
when it
to-
comes to the issue then of who is a source of truth, aren't you then saying that they are all equally sources of truth?
No,
But on the
yeah,
one hand, you have some companies which are regulated as media companies, and some, governance and reporting issues with respect to their finances, and smaller players who are not so tightly controlled. And are you suggesting that they should be all equally treated as sources of truth when they are perhaps
Yeah.
have different standards?
Okay, actually, it depends on what is the issue at hand. If there are hard evidence, then of course truth and falsehood can be easily determined. But if there is no hard evidence, then I guess in a normal academic environment, based on research, truth is socially constructed.
No, I understand.
So if more people think this to be the position, then I guess that should be the position taken.
I'm sorry, you're saying that the truth should be dependent on how many
is
people
socially
support the idea?
Yeah, it's socially constructed. Not how many people, but it's socially constructed.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the thinking in the academia. So truth is always a social construction, the meanings and so on comes about as a result of the interaction within the community.
I understand. But for the types of issues that we're talking about here, national security, race and religion, economic outcomes, sovereignty, political outcomes, you're saying that the truth is fluid.
No, not fluid, but socially constructed. So, for example, if somebody makes some accusation, okay, and then this is only one person making the accusation.
But that's
the
not
rest,
the type of deliberate online falsehoods that we're worried about here, right? We're talking about inflammatory, race, religion, politics,
Yeah,
sovereignty.
that's right.
that kind of-
So if all these players reckon that this is inflammatory and it's inappropriate, and then that would be regarded as a falsehood. That should be taken down.
So you're suggesting that if the media companies get together, and amongst the media companies, they decide that something should be taken down, then they should have the power to do that to the smaller media companies?
No, not just with the media company, but also different stakeholders.
Yes,
including
but I'm
government.
talking about the media companies. now.
Okay,
What-
among
what is
themselves.
the role that the media companies need to play in improving the situation if the status quo is unacceptable?
Okay, my own thinking is that we cannot use the size of company to determine truth. Otherwise, the smaller players will always be at the mercy of the bigger companies.
Okay?
So in this case, if the arbitration cannot come to a resolution, then maybe an external party, say the online citizenry or maybe the government-led initiative should come together and then
Well, there's a very
decide.
distinct difference between a role that a loose group of citizens can play versus the government. I mean, you can't say that we have the same opportunity, responsibility, and
Yeah,
resources.
that's right. But then I think it's a consensus decision
So
making.
if there is no consensus, who should step in then? I think your words.
Yeah, I guess in the end, I think the responsibility will still fall back on the government. That's my sense, if there's no consensus.
Okay. What about the tech companies? Should the tech companies play a role in this?
Yes, I think so.
What kind of
because
role
they
is
are
that?
not purely platforms and conduits of information, but they are also pushing out information on a regular basis. So when called upon, I think they should retract.
So they should be required to retract?
Yes, I think so.
But
If,
who
if
should
it
make
is
it-
shown to be false,
I see. So
Yeah.
once something is declared as false or illegal, your view is that they should be...
they should be asked to retract.
Okay. And should the size of the platform matter? So, for example, a small website that gets 100 hits a day versus, I don't know, a Facebook page that has a million followers, should we treat them the same or treat them differently?
In my view, I think we should treat them equally because the small players will one day become big and then things will linger around. Yeah.
And there's a possibility, of course, that you have cross-platform sharing
right,
as well.
that's
Okay. Does education have a role to play in the outcome on this?
Oh, definitely. We find that the educational initiative at the moment has not been too prevalent, and I think we can step up more efforts in this area.
Okay.
Maybe I can just add that there's a lot of talk about education being, but I do not think that is a panacea. It's easy to say that we should have more public visual media literacy. You know, that's an ideal. That's great to have. You know, some of them have suggested having the schools, education institutions. But I just feel that for emergency situations, and we have to probably inculcate this habit or sense in people about sharing online falsehoods and fake news. That the fear of the legal consequences should exceed the excitement in sharing this news, because these falsehoods grow because people share it. They are powerless in a vacuum itself. So we need to inculcate in the citizenry that such are antisocial habits. Such are also detrimental to the larger social good, because it's so easy to share this content. In especially situations of crisis, increasingly easy, and we're not sure where these materials sometimes content do come from. So this is actually my concern here, that we need more measures aside from just media literacy. Ideally that we should be reading different media content. We should compare different sources, but I think for most people that isn't the case. I think some research has proven that people do live in many people kind of live in the kind of media bubbles. They read what they want to read, and they believe what they would like to believe. So I think that there should be more when it comes to especially emergency situations. That it's not acceptable.
So would I characterize both of your points of view as that a deliberate online falsehood that affects the issues that we've talked about play no part in useful public discourse, should not be protected, and erodes trust in our democracy and our institutions?
Yeah, that's right. They shouldn't be protected in the name of the freedom of speech. They shouldn't.
So from your submissions and your comments, you also would support some legislative approach to this?
Yes, certainly.
Yes,
There are a lot of expressed concerns that legislation will be inappropriate, or that we have already got all the legislative tools in order to deal with this. So perhaps I could ask you those two questions. We have a divergence of views on whether our current legislative tools are adequate. We've had a number of law professors come and say that there are gaps in the law. We have people who are sort of the practitioners in this space, whether they're the media companies, people working with the technology, people who are working with content, who have come to say that even if you have the laws, you can't operationalize them at the moment in the way that needs to be done in order to deal with the virality and the spread, or the speed and the access. There are people who have come along and said, yes, we need laws, but the laws need to deal with my competitor and not with my industry. So we have a range of views to say that we need new laws or we need a legislative change. We've also had a range of views saying that our laws are adequate, and with examples of how the existing laws have been operationalized to deal with some online falsehoods. And we have a range of views saying that even if our laws are inadequate, that we should have no new laws because of the potential for abuse of those laws, or how having new laws would then reduce the opportunity for discourse and for dealing with these problems in some other way, including having greater civic participation. So you, if I read your submissions correctly and what you've said, both of you would look at legislative means as one of the many tools.
That's right.
But what would you say to the people who have views different from yours, as it were, that we have to look at the spectrum of views? So the people who perhaps say that we don't need new laws, or that our new laws are insufficient or going to have a negative effect. What would your view be to their representations?
My sense is that since the founding of Singapore until today, we are a relatively well-run country, primarily because of the weight of the law. So, for example, when we say no chewing gum, it's against the law, people don't do chewing gum. So when we say no falsehood, because this is against the law and these are the perimeters, and then people will stand up and say, hey, this is what we mean by things to be illegal, and therefore that will help curb some kind of deliberate online falsehood. So I think the law needs to be somehow tweaked to reflect the current reality. So, for example, we have the Sedition Act. So the Sedition Act was crafted pre-social media era, and then we may have to update the law to reflect the current reality.
Dr. Liu?
I would say that we can talk about this on a daily basis. When there are emergencies, I think the government would be taking the ultimate responsibility of any situation that arises. So it is, I think that laws may need to be updated. They may not necessarily need to be new. I'm not a legal expert, and I can't comment on the letter of the law, but that can be updated to reflect new realities. And I think more importantly, we need new politics to address such issues as well.
New politics?
Yes. Which means the government playing, on the part of the state, agencies playing, or even politicians and members of parliament playing more active roles in promoting these issues about falsehoods and fake news.
Sorry, are you referring to electoral politics or governance?
Both, especially governance. Yeah.
Okay, but they are quite distinct.
Yes.
You're suggesting that the government of the day needs to have a new approach to the governance of this issue.
Yes.
It's not quite the same as there needs to be a new political process to establish who the government of the day is. Which is the view that you are taking?
It's probably more of the former.
The former?
Yeah.
That our governance around this issue needs to be refreshed?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And if I could summarize, you're both agreeing that this is a serious problem. The deliberate online falsehoods should not be protected, and we need to do something about it. That we need a multifaceted approach, all the way from education, participation, and legislation. That this should be iterative over time because the circumstances will change. And in that space, you think, correct me if I'm mischaracterizing you, you are taking the position that establishing the truth is possible around these issues. There are various processes to establish the truth. And then dealing with falsehoods would require some degree of intervention. And some of that may be voluntary, some of that may be sort of from an industry-wide basis. And then for the extreme cases, especially in times of crisis, it may need to be a government type of intervention.
I would not be so bold to state establishing the truth, but I would say establishing common sense and facts of the case.
Well, establishing the facts,
Yeah.
if you take the fact as a proxy for truth, and we've had a representation from Professor Teo Lien, and I don't know if you're familiar with what she said. That this is something that happens on a daily basis, that this is the basis of how the law works. So I think I am prepared to take her word for it, and I think it seems a reasonable position that we would not be able to operate our entire legislative framework if the process and the courts were not able to then deal adequately with establishing the facts and the truth. I think it's a reasonable
So I accept
position.
that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Chua and Dr.
Okay, thank
Liu. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Chia Yong Yong.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for being with us. A couple of clarifications. I think we go back to Dr. Liu's paper on freedom of speech and also subsequently what both of you have shared. I noted your confirmation that deliberate online falsehoods should not be protected in the name of the freedom of speech. Could you elaborate on that? Oh, yeah. I know the question sounds like a no-brainer, but we have also had, people who have argued in the name of freedom of speech. So I'd like to hear your views.
I think in the normal functioning of a society, everybody is entitled their rights to their opinions. However, if the opinions infringe on the well-being of others, then that will threaten the harmony and the well-being of the society, and therefore that cannot be tolerated. So while we espouse freedom of speech, it should be qualified that it will not undermine the functioning of the society. So that's why I think the deliberate online falsehood must be curtailed and cannot be used and abused all in the name of the freedom of speech.
So essentially, what we have here is a balancing of the different rights
That's right.
within a bundle that everyone is entitled to:
That's
freedom
right.
of speech,
That's
your right to safety, your right to
Yes,
life,
that's right.
peaceful
That's
livelihood, and so on. So if there is a threat to all those other freedoms, then there could be some curtailing.
That's right.
Of course, we have to tread very carefully because freedom of expression is enshrined in our Constitution. It is a basic human liberty.
Yes, that's right.
I'm interested to find out your view on truth as opposed to fact. Yeah, because you mentioned that truth is socially constructed. And yesterday also we heard from our other witnesses their view that truth is a very different matter. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so it seems that if, for a given matter, if the facts can be laid out unambiguously, then it is no longer, social construction of truth will no longer be necessary because that can be established. For example, the molecule of water is H2O, so that becomes a fact, and that is also a truth. So there's no argument about it. But when there are multiple perspectives, but multiple layers of meaning, and things are not so clear-cut, so more gray, and I think in the normal functioning of society, then truth is socially constructed. So for example, filial piety, what does it mean to be filial to one's parents? So different cultures will express that quite differently. So within a particular context, that is regarded to be the truth, and that's the way things are done.
So given that again, I know you said it's not fluid, but I think there is some fluidity in the way you have described it. Given that, how do you then define falsehood? What is your definition of falsehood?
Okay. So in my submission, I define falsehood as something that's contrary to fact. So if you make a claim and the claim can be refuted unambiguously, then that can be deemed a falsehood. So if somebody has not passed away and you say the person has passed away, then obviously it can be verified, and that is actually a falsehood.
So if I take an example of filial piety, the filial piety, you say in certain cultures, a particular statement about filial piety could be the truth, and in others, so it's actually more like a value.
Yeah, that's right. So I think
Rather
truth
than
and value,
truth?
I think it's all enmeshed in a sociological context.
Okay, so if Dr. Puducherry did mention, but in the context of social security, race and religion, then how would you deal with this?
That's right. So in Singapore, we believe in a multicultural, multilingual society. So that becomes our values, and therefore this is the truth that we want to uphold. So in other societies, maybe one race is more domineering than the others. One race is more important than the others. But in our case here, we value multiculturalism, And that becomes our value, and that's also our truth. That's how we define ourselves.
And therefore, that's something that we need to protect,
That's right.
not just for social cohesiveness, but also as part of our national security objective.
That's right. That's right.
Yesterday, we also heard a differentiation between a criticism of religion and criticism of practitioners of that religion. The alternative, well, a couple of the witnesses before us from the other media, social media sites, they have said that, one or two of them have actually said that it is acceptable, that they think it is acceptable to criticize religion, but not necessarily the practitioners. Do you see a distinction in that?
No, I find that one should not criticize a religion or practitioner. I think this is a no-no, given what we really value and what we espouse as a country. So I think criticism against a religion or practitioner shouldn't be allowed.
Okay,
That's
so
my
in
personal
any event, therefore, we should guard all this very
That's right.
jealously. Okay,
That's right.
then I come to your point also about, you know, how Dr. Liu's table on the green, amber, and red light, and also your grid. In general, we agree. I think that we need to look at falsehoods over a spectrum. Likewise, also take a calibrated approach. The only question is when one crosses over to the other. And obviously, you know, would you be aware of something that starts as a very, very innocuous statement, which could then ultimately become an incitement or incendiary or inflammatory? Because it could also take the conflation of different statements made over a period of time as well. And also with social media, the way it amplifies, right, and spreads, that period of time could be very, very compressed. So how do you deal with what appears to be innocuous statements?
I think I made one of my case studies in my submission, which I should not elaborate or name the country involved. No. But these are the kind of low-level, undercurrent, daily conversations around, you know, that you cannot control within the borders of the nation-state. You know, it's a transnational conversation. It's inflammatory. People respond to it. It takes on religious significance. And right now, nothing is happening on a normal day, but I feel that we need not just a legal process, an administrative as well as a political mechanism to monitor and flag these issues, and if possible, raise them to the larger public, because sometimes people may not know that they are venturing into dangerous terrain. You know, it's like just a lagoon that you need to flag some of the deep waters. And the kind of implications of their actions, you know, to be sucked into this whole debate, what appears to be a debate, but turning into a kind of like foreign operation in some ways.
And so indeed, we therefore deal a lot more, I think, in the green area, although
we pray that it doesn't go to the other colors.
Yeah, but I think you know that tipping point.
Yeah.
The difficulty is determining when that tipping point is, and at which point then do you take more drastic action. And of course, you know, there are suggestions that perhaps we should intervene and preempt. The question, of course, is whether you prefer to hang a murderer or you want to prevent a murder, right? So the thing is, you know, at which point do you then want to intervene? And of course, we've also heard evidence to say that, you know, there's this backfire effect. You take it down, then people will say, oh, why did you take it down? And so on and so forth. And then it spreads. But on the other hand, we've also heard evidence of Dr. Carol Soon on the cognitive impact that falsehoods have, as well as our inclination to believe somehow unsavory posts than the truth. Plus the fact that, you know, when we try to debunk a falsehood, that falsehood is actually reinforced in our consciousness and subconsciousness. And that makes it even harder to debunk. So I think we're actually dealing with a lot of challenges like this to come to that what you might call a happy place, but I doubt very much if we could ever find it. Yeah, your views on that?
So I would say that there are some countries like the People's Republic of China that have taken their own social media. They have blocked Facebook and other Western-based social media platform. They have their own Weibo. Conversations and discussions are mainly taken in Chinese, actively monitored. So it's insulated and inoculated. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. So I think we have to accept the degree or certain level of these falsehoods that will continue to persist. And I feel that legislation, I think all of you agree here, will not be the answer as well. You just couldn't come up with a new law and expect the world to be at ease and harmonious. So I think it must be supplemented by very active political and administrative measures.
Thank you. I have one final point, and that relates to the social media platforms. I noted that you did say that they're also pushing up content, and they should be responsible for that content as well. So, what is your view on their argument that they should be allowed to self-regulate?
I think in general, they can self-regulate until such a point where their self-regulation is malfunctioning. So for example, after self-regulating, we still find falsehood lingering around spreading. This may not be high-impact falsehood, but that seems to persist. And therefore, I think something has to be done to clamp down on such spread. So my opinion is that for media companies, if they are pure platform providers, it's fine. But they are not pure platform providers. They're actually pushing out information, and that makes them culpable to any spread of falsehood.
Indeed. So would you agree that if therefore we have evidence that the platform companies and the tech companies are, well, they're obviously content providers as well, right, in that sense?
Yeah.
And then we have evidence that they have failed to regulate themselves in enforcing their own policy or in the way they have interpreted or applied their own policies, then there is room for us to argue or
Yes,
to
that's-
implement some form of regulation on them in relation to content.
Yeah, certainly so.
Okay, thank you. No
Yeah,
further
thank you.
questions.
Professors, thank you for taking the time this morning. Can I just ask some clarification from the both of you, in particular, Prof. Liu? You spoke earlier about situations where there's crisis in the real world. For example, a pandemic or infectious disease epidemic, a riot, some incident, and then there are deliberate online falsehoods that seek to exacerbate the situation. And you said specifically that the government needs to be more of a lifeguard, lean forward, take forward gear actions to prevent the situation from escalating out of control. I'd like to just ask you for your views on two specific scenarios. The first is that there's no crisis in the real world. It's okay, but some deliberate online falsehood on social media then creates that real world crisis. For example, by sparking a protest, a riot, a run on the bank. So it's not a crisis and then falsehoods appearing to then fan the flames, but it was sparked off using and exploiting social fault lines. The second scenario would be more insidious. It's deliberate drip, drip, drip situation, where again it's deliberate from various parties and seeking to stir, to sour, basically set up the firewood, if I may say.
Yeah.
So, and figuratively, they set up the firewood where no firewood existed, with a view that sometime in the future you set the fire. So three scenarios. One is real world crisis, and people come in with DOFs to fan the flames. You said that lifeguard approach, meaning government needs to be more interventionist, needs to keep control of the online spread of falsehoods. I'd like your views on the other two scenarios. One would be where a deliberate online falsehoods creates an acute situation on the ground in the real world. And the second situation where there's a drip, 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 whether by one party or multiple parties acting alone or in concert, to sour the ground, to stir a situation, to deepen social fissures, and this just creates the conditions in the real world for the situation to be ignited.
So I think, fortunately, Singapore has not experienced that yet. I would say yet, and that there's actually, because of the kind of like transnational nature and the globalized nature of such connectivities, the situation is more complicated than like 10 years ago or 20 years ago, so there's I mean, I think forces would make use of, first of all, underlying or existing tensions. So no smoke without fire. Any measures have to be, I would say that, address even not through the online sphere. The politics has to be done way before, because by the time it can be provoked, I think there is already a situation that it may be too late. But I mean, maybe we're talking about situations that kind of happen all of a sudden, like an epidemic that breaks out. So that could be different. But the underlying undercurrent tensions, like I would say, like Little India riot, for example, it was a sudden outburst. I remember it vividly, seeing the kind of social media feeds. But there were also pre-existing tensions and grievances, congested environments, poor working and living conditions, for example. So I think these are the issues that, it cannot just be addressed with a sudden surge in policies or laws. It has to be done persistently, patiently, and quietly on a daily basis, to build these bonds together. And also, but not forgetting that, the populace should also be made aware that, such forces are there to take advantage, to exploit the situation, should something happen. So it's something that is based on what we do every day rather than how we react all of a sudden. But of course, if things happen, and we have to expect that it will happen. Because I do sense that sometimes there's this idea that we need to isolate or protect ourselves completely. It wouldn't work, It happens in every society, and we have to be prepared to deal with it. Thank you.
Okay, in my research, I come across two types of users within the social media environment. One is called the stiflers, and the other one is called the spreaders. Stiflers are people who receive message, and then they will not spread. The message just end with them. Spreaders are those who pass along the message. And then how do we distinguish between stiflers and spreaders? And one of the quite strong predictor of their role is known as the epistemic belief or epistemological sophistication. So this is basically their perception about the characteristics of knowledge and the process of knowing. So people who view knowledge as a simple kind of things that can be obtained easily, then they tend to be spreaders because there's no critical thinking. So this is in addition to the information and media literacy we talk about. So that's a psychological disposition. So I think this is more of a long-term approach. So in the second scenario that you painted, where somebody create an acute ground situation where nothing exists, and if we have more stiflers than spreaders, then soon there is no traction to fan the thing out, and then it just die by itself. So like most of the rumors research I've done, they die a natural death after a while. So the death might come earlier. I think what I fear more is the drip feed kind of syndrome, because it's so insidious and nobody knows about it. So I think this is a lot more complex than that we can deal with just with simple legislation or initiatives. I think this is multimodal, multi-pronged, and maybe a long-term approach. Maybe this is really the holy grail of combating against online falsehood, to guard against drip feed. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I ask a second question? Yeah? And that is in relation to the impact of social media on the importation of disputes or tensions from abroad into Singapore. Singapore is one of the most religious diverse countries or societies in the world. We're multiracial. And we are also cosmopolitan, meaning people come through, they come into Singapore to live, work, play. We rely on them for some skills, especially in the construction work and all. In the distant past, if someone were to try to import some of their foreign conflicts, the domestic conflict from abroad into Singapore, for example, they tried to hold a demonstration involving a dispute in another part of the world where they come from, or a foreign preacher or religious leader would want to come and bring his or her brand of firebrand religion into Singapore, with the attendant consequences of a particular religious viewpoint and tolerance or lack thereof. We would have the tools, the regulatory tools to prevent that. Either you can't come in, or you can't use the space, you can't then have a box to stand on and a megaphone to amplify and spread these views and bring in a foreign problem into Singapore and make it domestic. What would you say that the social media has made that much more porous and much more difficult to police, and therefore different strategies need to be taken to prevent some of the import of foreign disputes?
Yeah, I agree, because in the past, messages get transmitted face-to-face, so we can stop the person from coming through the country, so the border is kind of watertight. But in the social media era, somebody can post YouTube videos, and then anybody in Singapore can access that video. So I think the landscape has changed and the boundary is indeed more porous. So I think to combat this again, there should be education within the population. And if the person belongs to a particular religion, then I think the onus is on that religion representation in Singapore to call this out as a falsehood. Yeah.
Thank you, Minister, for the question. And I would say that, yes, the social media has made it a lot more porous. You cannot just have a quiet word with a religious leader or representative, as in the past. You are not sure who is watching what. But what I can say that the plus point is that everybody is actually monitoring each other too. So the government has also came up with, for example, dealing with ISIS. If you suspect any of your friends online are watching radical materials, you should actually report them in. This has happened. One of this ISA detainees, Zulkifli, he was posting pro-ISIS materials online on his Facebook post. So people responded, they reported. And so there's also the citizenry have to play a role in that, in calling out each other, in monitoring the situation. The state apparatus cannot do it alone. So you need this broader consensus. You need a kind of awareness of people, for how to conduct yourself in the online space, what to look out for. I mean, part of the media literacy, but as I mentioned, that media literacy perhaps is only just one aspect. Legalities are also one aspect, so they have to be put together. And at the end of the day, when complaints are made, the government must be seen to be taking action. And I think that is the most critical element here, and not just ignoring, any of the grievances that have been aired in public. Thank you.
Thank you. Just my final question.
Yeah, sure.
And this is, the traffic light proposal is a very attractive one, which suggests that a lot of work has to be done on an everyday basis to monitor, to recognize, and to call out the drip effect, the corrosive effect, the subtle, surreptitious contamination of people's emotions and mindsets through deliberate online falsehoods. Because when it comes to a crisis situation, you must at least have done your homework in the weeks, months, and years before to try to avoid that situation. But I'm now focused on your red situation. Is it red color?
Yeah, red color.
Traffic light red. Whether it's a riot, whether it's a pandemic, where it's red hot, literally. You chose the color for a reason. And yesterday we heard two contrasting views about the kinds of legislative or legal levers that governments ought or ought not to have and ought or ought not to use in a red situation. And that is a very fundamental, the responses and the approach that we take in such a situation will kind of inform the entire approach that you take to deliberate online falsehoods, because it's a cascading effect. An example, I'll give you an example. So it's two different views, one by Ms. Kirsten Han and one by Professor Charan George. The example wasn't posed to Prof. Charan George, but he in fact articulated something quite similar. And so I give you an example. This is a 2014 fake video that was carried by a local news network in Myanmar about a Buddhist girl who was raped by Muslim men, 2 Muslim men. It was later, according to news reports, allegedly it was later proven to be false. The girl had been paid to make those false claims. Those false claims were carried on local news media and, of course, had many eyeballs. And a Buddhist monk with strong views about religious tolerance in his country decided to carry that on his post, and that added to the virality of it. It was the second situation I talked about earlier. It sparked a real-life situation where none existed. It was fake, and it sparked a real-life crisis. It resulted in injury and death and destruction of homes and property. People were killed, and all because of a fake video. So this example, to be fair, Prof. Charan George, it was not presented to him. But his point was, when there's such a crisis, where people have used hate propaganda, hate news, and it's false, you don't spend time responding by distributing flyers about media literacy at the time. You must throw the book, you must act, you must nip the problem in the bud. And he mentioned take down, right? Stop, stem. On the other hand, Ms. Kirsten Han's philosophy, and that translated into her position, is that the video should not be taken down, because her concern is on impact on freedom of expression, but specifically the concern that if we take down, it will create a bigger problem in that you will have what do you call that, blowback situation. You know, people will backfire situation. I'm sorry, backfire situation will occur. You will exacerbate the problem, and therefore don't take down the post because you're concerned about backfire. And the second point was that if there are already these social tensions, then having it, not having it, taking it down, not taking it down will not help the situation. In that kind of crisis situation, I'd like to just hear your application of the traffic light approach and fundamentally what philosophies will drive you in that kind of crisis situation.
Maybe from the way I predict technology innovations, that in future, or even when we're speaking now, something that has been posted will never be taken down. It will exist in other platforms. It can be, it will turn up somewhere else in other countries, or people can do a VPN access in other places. So, but the takedown principle is important for expressing a strong message. So it's not so much of the actual operational effect, but more of the symbolic political message that will be sent forward, that the government is serious about this, the authorities are acting on it, an unjust video has been, or a deliberately manipulative video or literature has been posted, and it should be called out on that. So I think that's my principle when we come to the red light, you know, because I hope that doesn't happen to Singapore, that when you have a red light situation, lives are involved. And I would not suggest that we turn off the switch completely like Sri Lanka and Egypt in 2011. Because when you turn off the switch, you do also affect information flows that are more positive and constructive as well.
Professor, when you say it's symbolic, you have to call it out, are you saying that just taking down is not alone, you must call it out, you must explain why you're taking it down, why you're putting it out?
I think the government has been doing it now, right, for many of the instances. And that, so it's not just taking down, but, you know, also explaining at the same time, you know, so all this have to be done concurrently, not quietly, because if you do it quietly, it creates more conspiracy theories and more suspicion.
even if, as you say, it will still linger somewhere.
Yes, it will linger
The
somewhere.
important symbolism of saying this involves lives, it is false, it's deliberate. We will take that step, but we'll explain and call it out.
Yes, that's right.
Professor?
Yeah, okay, this is exactly what I feel. So the taking down itself cannot be done in isolation of other measures. So it has to be publicized in mainstream media and then get people to spread what is wrong. So the taking down itself is therefore interpreted in a larger context of protecting what we really value as a society. Yeah.
Thank you, professors, for your responses. Thank you.
Mr. Pritam Singh?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Professor Chua and Professor Liu, for your submission and your evidence to the committee today. I just have one question, and that's building on what Professor Liu said earlier about non-legislative measures, and within that rubric, you need political and administrative measures, and we did get a flavor of what you were referring to when you answered Minister Lee's three additional questions. But just to get a sense, could you expand on what other measures you had in mind when you were considering the Green Paper and the terms of reference of this committee, whether there were any other options? Because we all speak of media literacy like, it's you press the button and suddenly we're all media literate, but it doesn't happen that way, and it's got a long gestation period. But are there any other inputs, other things that the state can consider, or the ministry can consider when it drafts legislation? At least legislators can debate that point further.
So maybe some other measures that I can think of, which applies more towards the probably a yellow or even a red situation, would be to have penalties against those who not just create online falsehoods, but those who spread it actively. Because it cannot be done at leisure. It cannot be something that is taken lightly. The populace must be informed of this, especially in an emergency situation. It's not a case that you should be allowed to be taking leaflets of enemy propaganda dropped from planes 70 years ago. I think the same logic should apply. And then maybe administratively and politically, there needs to be a lot more public dialogue and even education with community sectors and the grassroots. I think one of my concerns is that it's not with those who are online, but those who are not. Those who share from like WhatsApp, that they may be perpetuating some of the myths and falsehoods unwittingly in their daily interactions. And I think it's very important for our leaders and our, not just academics, but the society as a whole to make sure that such practices, such a culture is being reduced or being managed and controlled. Right? So this is some of my maybe suggestions that I hope that we can actually do it more actively. And more so especially what I mentioned during times of maybe general elections, when sentiments are higher, and online falsehoods should be policed more actively. I think in the case which I actually feel personally, if I may allow to elaborate, these are not with ordinary people. The mainstream media on the casual accusation of one of the Workers' Party candidates for a sexual affair with a former student, casually published, which I think in future we should call out all this casual reporting of falsehoods directly against any member of any political party. So I did have a part of my submission about the electioneering process too, and I hope that we do have a more holistic way of managing this, and not just in situations of just emergencies or a code red situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Chua, only if you have something additional to add, but if not, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, is there no further questions? Professor Chua, Professor Liu, thank you very much for taking time to come to the Select Committee and for your contributions to the process. We'll be sending you a transcript of today's events. If there are any errors, please correct them and send it back to us. Okay, and
So,
thank you.
I just
Okay,
like
thank
to
you very much.
express a word of thanks to Chairman and the members of this panel for taking this time to deliberate on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Clerk of Parliament, could you invite the next set of witnesses to the witness table?